Hello, everyone, and welcome to this workshop on managing audio-visual materials in ArchivesSpace. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by Siobhan Hagan of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Moving Image Archive, Independent Archivist Megan McShea, Jamie Marie Wagner of University of Colorado Boulder Libraries, and Hannah Wyatt Davis of Florida State University Libraries. In this webinar, these archivists who work with audiovisual materials in ArchivesSpace will discuss how their shared experiences have led them to help and bolster one another's work in ArchivesSpace and in managing audiovisual materials. They'll also discuss the specific projects they have worked on to describe audiovisual materials in ArchivesSpace. As I mentioned, your presenters today are Siobhan Hagan, Megan McShea, Jamie Marie Wagner, and Hannah Wyatt Davis. Siobhan holds her MA in Moving Image Archiving and Preservation from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and has worked in a variety of collecting organizations throughout her career, including the UCLA Library, the National Aquarium, and the Smithsonian Institute. She is currently the project manager of the Memory Lab Network at the DC Public Library and is the founder and CEO of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Moving Image Archive. She has been active as a member of the Association of Moving Image Archivists, AMIA. She is currently co-chair of the local TV task force, co-chair of the Regional Audiovisual Archives Committee, is a member of the election committee, and was an AMIA director of the board from 2015 to 2017. Megan McShea is an independent archivist in Baltimore, Maryland, currently focusing on community archives, audiovisual archives, digitization planning, and digital asset management. Prior to that, she was the audiovisual archivist at the Archives of American Art Smithsonian Institution. She is the author of AAA's Guidelines to Processing Collections with Audiovisual Material and teaches the workshop Arrangement and Description of Audiovisual Materials for the Society of American Archivists. She currently serves on the board of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Moving Image Archive. Jamie Marie Wagner is the first dedicated moving image archivist in the University of Colorado Boulder Library's Rare and Distinctive Collections. Since 2019, she has overseen the library's archival film and video material, as well as collections related to Colorado media history and American experimental filmmaking. She holds an MA in film and an MLIS from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's currently the Rocky Mountain Area Representative to the AMIA Regional Audiovisual Archives Committee and Continuing Education Coordinator for the Society of Rocky Mountain Archivists. Hannah Wyatt Davis is the Preservation Librarian at Florida State University Libraries, where she leads and directs collection management and preservation efforts in the Special Collections and Archives Division. She also serves as the ArchivesSpace Technical Lead for FSU's 6 repositories and is a founding member and chair of the Society of Florida Archivists ArchivesSpace Working Group. We will hold all questions until the Q&A at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and questions will be read and answered during the allocated time for Q&A. If you have a general question or need some other form of assistance or just want to talk to your fellow attendees, please feel free to reach out in the chat. You also have the ability to turn on closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can elect to show or hide subtitles by selecting Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen and pressing the little up arrow there. You can also elect to view the full transcript, either in tandem with subtitles or in lieu of subtitles by selecting that option. And with that, I'll turn things over to your presenters. Siobhan, if you'd like to start us off.
Great, thank you so much. Just pulling up my slides. Great, hi everybody. I'm Siobhan Hagan, and I am the co-chair of the Association of Moving Image Archivists Regional Audiovisual Archives Committee. And that's a mouthful, so we call the organization AMIA and the committee RAVA. And I just want to give a shout out to my fellow co-chair of RAVA, Emily Vinson from the University of Houston. So I'm just setting up this organization today for you all who don't know about AMIA and the RAVA committee so that you kind of understand where the topic for this webinar came about and get to know this organization a little bit and its resources. So first we'll just set up AMIA. Association of Moving Image Archivists, once again. And AMIA is a nonprofit organization that is a professional organization with paying members with the mission to basically help its media professionals who are dedicated to the preservation and use of moving image media. So this is creating a network across the globe. So it's an international organization with paying members, as I mentioned, and these members are the ones who make up the board of directors, the committees, task forces, and working groups that get the work done of the organization, along with the, I hate to not mention the staff of AMIA, who are wonderful and do so much work. So just to learn a little bit more about AMIA, you can go to amianet.org and learn more about the mission, the work being done, and then other resources from the committees and task forces that are being put out there. Now, the Regional Audiovisual Archives Committee is a committee of the membership. So there's committees of the board and there's committees of the membership, and this one is committee of the membership. As I mentioned, I'm a co-chair along with Emily Vinson, and basically our mission deals with all topics surrounding archiving audiovisual materials that document the history of geographical areas and cultures. And I have the very long URL here. And just in case you want to like take a screenshot or something, I'm going to read our long longer mission so that you can have time to do that. RAVA addresses the needs and concerns of archivists who find themselves responsible for preserving and providing access to audiovisual materials that document the history of geographical areas and local cultures. This committee seeks to enhance communication and collaboration between regional archivists and explore initiatives that bring greater attention to the value and challenges of regional audiovisual materials. So especially since the pandemic started, the RAVA committee has been holding quarterly meetings via Zoom. And then typically we have our one annual in-person meeting that happens at the annual conference, which is normally in the fall of every year. Obviously last year that did not happen. So we're really, I'm really dedicating to keeping up the quarterly remote meetings because it's just been really, really great. It's mostly we say it's kind of like group therapy, but it's a time for sharing news from all the members, which are, as I mentioned, international, and then news that's coming up, questions, things that are annoying you about your collection, things that you hope to hear more about from other people in the group, dealing with all kinds of stuff. So recently we've had some sharing of LibGuides and syllabi from folks within the group across the country. And then digitization, sharing about experiences with digitization vendors, and then giving some pricing out, and saying kind of like comparing and contrasting, something that you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable maybe like writing in the email, but just kind of just chatting. And then we've also recently been talking a lot about licensing policies and creating like full-time positions for licensing and dealing with those kinds of requests from like documentary filmmakers and people putting on exhibits and things like that. And then, of course, what led to the webinar today is that we really had a lot of people asking questions about ArchivesSpace and using that for their audiovisual archives and materials. There's lots of questions and some sharing of ideas. And then once we, started thinking about it, then we thought, you know what, this is really great. And I'm sure that there are so many others out there that have this type of material or similar, any audiovisual material, not necessarily regional in nature, but that folks would really want to know some of the, successes and failures of using ArchivesSpace and maybe how we can learn from each other and help each other and not reinvent the wheel, right? And then also have a sense of community that we're all in this together and can figure this out, not on our own. So I just want to also, while we're thinking about archival description, I want to encourage you to not just think about how to describe your audiovisual materials in ArchivesSpace, but to incorporate more critical approaches within your archival description policies. And I just want to give a shout out to the Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia Anti-Racist Description. This resource is amazing, and I really recommend that you check it out to consult it. thank you so much. Please reach out to me at this email here, Siobhan, my first name, @marmia.org. Thank you so much. And next we'll be hearing from Megan McShea.
Thanks, Siobhan. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for inviting me to join this panel. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jamie and Hannah have to say as well. So I'll just share my screen and get started. So I'm Megan McShea, and there's my name like 5 times, sorry. So I'm going to talk briefly about work I did at the Archives of American Art with AV processing and description, and then work that we've been doing with MARMIA's WJZ-TV Collection in ArchivesSpace here in Baltimore. I was the audiovisual archivist at the Archives of American Art from 2007 to 2019. They have audiovisual material in about 15% of their collections. I counted about 22,000 pieces of media when I was there, spread out over 760 collections, but I'm sure it's grown since then. Typically, the collections also contain textual records and other types of records as well, apart from a few documentary production collections and some broadcast materials. Most of the AV in that repository is non-professional media documenting some aspect of art history, art making, art exhibition, scholarship, journalism, lives of artists, etc. So a little context, I worked there on the processing team, and our work was all about improving research access by processing collections and producing finding aids. That's what we did. So my role as AV archivist on that team was to create all the workflows and procedures and capacity for providing research access to analog AV media, which has some extra hurdles for research access because of format obsolescence. So one of the biggest hurdles that we identified as a big, finding aid centric kind of shop was inconsistent description of AV. So I began to look around for guidelines, and I didn't find any, so I wrote some. And these guidelines were designed really to empower non-AV specialists who are processing collections to kind of confidently process AV material that they encountered in collections they were working on. And the hope was to standardize our local practice and make sure that we do what's needed to enable research access to that AV material. So the guidelines can be applied in a variety of contexts, but they do reflect the local practice there in a manuscript repository with a processing team using what I'd call a high touch process to arrange and describe archival collections. So then I very fortunately got involved with MARMIA here in Baltimore. MARMIA is a small nonprofit, which up to now has been all volunteer run. They have several collections, but the biggest one is this collection, the WJZ-TV Collection, which is the archives of a local TV station in Baltimore. The collection has about 22,000 pieces of media, which ironically for me is almost the same number of pieces of media across all the collections at the Archives of American Art, but this is in a single collection. And the collection's mostly videotape, and it's all broadcast media. So Siobhan has this page set up on the MARMIA website with these inventories that she inherited. And she's made great use of these inventories. She's made them public, she's made them searchable. She's written clear instructions for making the best use of them for researchers and for making requests. So when I joined the board of MARMIA, Siobhan let me know that she wanted to migrate the inventories to ASpace using a hosting service. So now I'm going to show you just briefly how we did that, basically, and then reflect a little on what ASpace offers to a collection like this, and also how my own perspective changed on AV description from this experience. So here's an example of an inventory in HTML on the website, on MARMIA's website. So the text in the inventories are basically transcriptions of the tape labels. So as the caveat says on the page here, they might be inaccurate, they might use outdated or offensive language. And I will say they also typically don't do a great job of describing the content. You get some sense, but there's usually much more that could be said about the content of any of these tapes than what's listed here. And often there's more stories than are listed on the tape label. So, but the tape labels weren't written for collection description, right? They were written as practical shorthand by the people who were making this media so that they could use them in the broadcast context. So it is what it is. And this inventory for Evening Magazine goes on for 185 boxes. This is one of the largest series in the collection. And just to show you another quick example, this is another program in the collection, the Eyewitness News series. So this inventory only has dates and broadcast time slots. That's what was written on the tapes. And this series contains over 20 years of daily news broadcasts in Baltimore. So while the inventories aren't perfect, they are so much better than nothing. So it's something to search. It's a way in. Users can do full text searching on the website for any string, including dates. You can control F to the terms in the individual inventories, and you can email requests based on what's found there. When tapes are digitized, the digital video gets uploaded to MARMIA's Internet Archive collection, and metadata gets enhanced once we have a digital file to describe. So I'll circle back to that in a couple minutes. So here's a quick walkthrough of the metadata migration process that we've been using. So this is a raw inventory document for PM Magazine series. You can see at a glance some of the data cleanup issues that we had to work through. So tapes that had no label, some missing text, dates, standardization, line breaks in cells, in tables, in a Word document, trailing punctuation, and so on. I want to give a shout out to Zoe Yang, who was MARMIA's first intern from the MIAP program at NYU who worked on this project. And she did a lot of this initial work and created this manual to document the decisions that got made along the way about the process. So that's been a huge contribution. And she transformed that inventory into this spreadsheet. And anyone who's used the spreadsheet bulk import in ASpace will recognize this, I think. This shows you all the fields that we used, which the spreadsheet ingest has many, many more columns you can use, but this is what we used. And the main work of the project so far has been really getting all the data from the inventory into this format and cleaning it up. And we used Excel and Google Sheets for all of that. And I was really just kind of a coach, knowing the tools and the data requirements. And Zoe did a lot of the work. So here's the data post ingest. This is the public user interface. This shows the very first item level archival object in that series, that unlabeled tape in box 1. So you can see in the right-hand column how all the titles and dates show up in that interface in a list. And you can begin to see some of what this environment adds for the user. So there's this breadcrumb trail in the banner that's kind of towards the top of the screen that shows you where you are in the collection. There's standardized dates that are now searchable. And there's a request button for researchers to make requests to MARMIA directly from the interface. And if you go to the top of that hierarchy in where it says collection organization and click the collection title, you can see all the series represented here with their date ranges. And just the sense of the whole that you get from this, and then always being able to see kind of where you are in the collection and where the items you're looking at fit into the collection. To me, that's just a big kind of wayfinding value. And you can still search for any string just like you can on the website, but here you can refine by date and you can make requests for starters. And also, we've started to fill in some of the collection level data and series level data that sort of summarizes and provides explanation about the collection. So in addition to having that list of series, you see the overall extent, the overall arrangement. We have a processing note just saying this is a work in progress, explaining the source of the metadata. And it's still very much work in progress. But as we make progress, there's this framework for adding in data. We've got our manual to keep it consistent. And there's a standard place to put, anything that we learn about the collection as we go along. We have a place to record that knowledge and pass it on to any user. So I find that really valuable. And I hope that the users will too. And the item level, tape level metadata is still its imperfect self, but we can kind of leverage the value of that metadata within this system to make it understandable, to make it searchable, to make it actionable. And one last thing I quickly want to show you. You can see this note under the existence and location of copies heading, which is a link to an aviary collection. So we've been trying out the aviary platform for delivering the digitized content. So in combination with the Internet Archive, where the assets are stored on the public web, available on the public web, we're linking out to this other tool that you can, that can serve as sort of a system of record for the item level metadata of digitized collection content. So I'm just going to quickly show you an example of that in case people are unfamiliar with that usage. So this is an item level description of a tape that's been digitized from the PM magazine series. This archival object has a digital instance where we entered a URL and identified the asset. So you see in this public interface that ASpace displays this icon at the item level, and you click it to access the video. This is just a shot of the staff interface for entering that information, which can also be done in bulk via spreadsheet, by the way. And this is all the data that we have in that record. It's very simple, but then you click on the icon and it takes you here to this record where you can see the metadata that was enhanced when the item was digitized. So, there isn't a lot of extra metadata, but there's some. You've got a duration, you've got more description of the content. There's an item level identifier. And if we wanted to add a transcript, we could do that here. There are just lots of potential features in this system that was designed for digital media, so that ASpace doesn't have. So the digital object instance in ASpace lets you link out and connect the ASpace description with the digital object that lives in this other tool and provides this more robust system. So it strikes me looking at this that, fewer than 1,000 tapes in this 22,000 tape collection have been digitized. So an item level database probably would not provide adequate research access to the whole collection for someone who wanted to look and see what was there in general. But ASpace can sort of be the system of record for the comprehensive collection, and then this other system can be a system of record for item level metadata, and they can be directly linked at the level of that digitized item. So if the way I was used to processing collections at Archives of American Art was a high touch processing routine, this has been a no touch processing routine. And I'm pretty amazed at how much it delivers, honestly. So, and that was partly necessitated by the pandemic, but also necessitated by just the volume of the collection. The state of the metadata and the size of the organization. It's what we could do with available resources. So, I had to kind of let go of some of my pieties about what finding aids should be, but I'm impressed by how much the system can do for the collection. And so it's sort of like data migration as processing, which really flips the workflow for me. And, there's a lot of possibilities now that exist for this collection's description and accessibility because of this community-supported, standards-based tool. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to Jamie.
Thank you, Megan. Let me make sure I'm on the right screens here. Okay, so what I can describe today is how we at CU Boulder, as sort of a small to medium archive, adapted the AV processing guidelines that Megan created at the Archives of American Art for our own audiovisual material. For some background, the archives is housed within the libraries at CU Boulder. We have over 50,000 linear feet of material, and obviously within those collections, we have photographs, film, videotapes, and sound recordings, but we're not a film archive specifically. Throughout all of our collections, we have things like publicity films and home movies and research footage, and a lot of recorded events like lectures and performances. And I assume that's probably the norm for most general archives. Before 2019, when I started this position, our media material was kind of just languishing on shelves. So when I'm using ArchivesSpace, I'm not usually migrating existing descriptions because we don't have very much legacy information. And I'll come back to our media collections, but I just want to talk about our archive situation, our ArchivesSpace situation generally. You can see that we have made a few changes to the PUI, but for the most part, we're using the out of the box public interface. And as I'll talk about more, the way that the PUI displays does affect some of my decisions about what fields to use for certain things. Our first implementation of ArchivesSpace was in about 2017. And at that time, the new head of archives was also expanding our staff to kind of build our capacity. And so now there's 8 people who work directly on processing collections. And so these are the main people who are actively creating records in ArchivesSpace and supervising student workers who use ArchivesSpace. And I mentioned that because you can see a lot of us have specific formats of material and sort of specific functional roles that influence what we want out of ArchivesSpace and how we use it. In that vein, when we started using ArchivesSpace, we spent about a year kind of just trying out various things. But by 2018, 2019, we learned enough to start writing a processing manual. And within that manual, there's an ArchivesSpace section that describes our mandatory versus optional fields and sort of style guides for different fields. And there's also an appendix that I wrote on sound recordings and moving images. Some important things about that manual. First, we really do use it regularly, especially for smaller and less common things. Second, it was developed in a really slow and deliberate process of collaboration. So maybe once a month, we would bring together existing guides and resources, and we really just talked through how we wanted to use, where we wanted to put each piece of information. And one reason that was really important is that, like I said before, a lot of us have different focuses. So those of us who do a lot of item level description, which is usually the photo archivist and the sound archivist and I, we have different needs than people who are doing box folder. But we also have different needs from each other. So we were all able to have really direct input over developing those guidelines. And then last, it's an iterative document, and we do come together again as a group whenever we want to make changes. So for our media collections, the first thing I did when I started this new position was to write those guidelines based on Megan's guide from the Archives of American Art. This was also before our new sound and music archivist started. That was just this past February, and I know that she and I will make some changes to those depending on what she needs as she gets more comfortable here. But my primary goals there were first, consistency across collections. Obviously, the level of description is going to vary from one to another. But when we do have item level description, I want it to be in the same place and the same terms for every collection. And my second goal was simplicity for the sake of the researcher, and I'll talk about some examples of that. Within that guide, we have controlled vocabularies for things like format and genre. We have instructions for the description of media material within the collection level scope and content. Plus we have like standard copyright and access policy that we include in those. There's series level instructions for media series and item level instructions for individual objects. There's some little ways that we diverged from the AAA guidelines. That guide uses the extent field to give technical description information for each item, and we do that too. But within their guide, they put the film gauge in the dimensions, and we put it in the extent type. And I only mention that because that's one of those things that I sort of negotiated with the photo archivist. We worked together to develop a standard set of options for the physical type. And this seemed to work better for us as like a uniform standard that goes across all of our collections and our material types. For physical details and the extent, we add a very specific set of specifications in a controlled order. And the Smithsonian guidelines say that you can use this field to transcribe labels or to give like general physical descriptions, but I really prefer the like tidy and uniform order for how the extent appears. That other information I could put in a physical description note, but on our public side, it currently displays under the additional notes dropdown, and I worry that researchers don't know that they're supposed to scroll down and look for it. Similarly, I wasn't sure where to put like production credit information, so I could make a general note called production credits, but that's going to have the same display issue. So I put both of those things in the scope and content. And another reason for that is that when you use the finding aid view, and we changed the name of that, it used to say collection organization. I know that the scope and content information shows with the object record in this view, but not all of the fields show here. So for those additional notes, you'd still need to know that you have to click through to the object record and then scroll down to find them. But when that information is all in the scope content, I know it's going to be obvious when we're using this view. Obviously, those are things that we could change on our back end eventually, like moving where different fields display, but that's not something that we can do soon. And I'd like the finding aid to be as easy to use as possible in the meantime. Importantly, nothing here violates DAX. There's like there's very few item level rules in DAX, especially for the little parts within the extent. So we wouldn't have a problem if we were to migrate out of ArchivesSpace at some point. One major thing to consider with media material is multiple containers. So, one intellectual property could be made up of multiple reels. And I know that I want to have one instance for each item because each reel ideally has its own reel number and barcode. And my MPLP version is just to post everything as individual objects. That's faster than like trying to sort out and distinguish the different parts. Like for these videos, I don't know enough to know if these are like parts of the whole or maybe copies of the same thing, but it's not ideal for a researcher to see like 4 different versions of the same thing listed. So when I have been able to fully inspect something and had more time to work on the description, I can make one object record for the title or the property, and then add separate instances for each reel that make it up. You can also add multiple extents that describe different reels or sets of reels. And if you put the reel number in the container summary, then it's always going to be obvious like which reel corresponds to which physical description. And then I can also use the scope and content to kind of further explain the differences among them. And ultimately, I think it works really well. I like the way that the multiple extents display, and it makes it really clear which items a researcher would want to request depending on what they need. Quickly, we did start using the spreadsheet from Harvard, which you may know. It works with a plugin that creates a load via spreadsheet button, and you can upload records directly from the spreadsheet. And so to add multiple instances and extents, it was really easy on that spreadsheet to just duplicate those columns. And if you change the underscore number, you can make subsequent entries. And so then it's going to upload this object record with like 3 or 4, however many instances and extents I want for that object. Last, I want to say that for most of our collections, ArchivesSpace is like the finding aid. It's like our primary place for collection management information and like internal processing notes. But for our media collections, I really only use ArchivesSpace for public-facing information. And when I'm done processing the collection, I'll add the updated media inventory to ArchivesSpace with those standards that we developed. But ArchivesSpace is not where I'm like tracking and managing media material directly. And that's because from a collection management standpoint, I want to have a lot of really specific information about each item, and those don't necessarily map to EAD. So to create that physical detailed field in the extent, I have to concatenate all of those technical columns into one line. And then on the public side, I think it displays in a way that's really efficient for researchers, but it's less helpful for me because now I can't like sort or filter reels by specific details. And then for those titles that have multiple reels, the kind of reel specific information can get lost in that collection, that collective description style. ArchivesSpace may be able to generate reports like that, or I could be adding more information to like the instance information. But ultimately, you know, this isn't what EAD was made for. So it just might not be the right platform while I'm doing the like active inventory and inspection process. Similarly though, sometimes a researcher will want to know like, what film material do you have? And we don't have a very clear way right now to do an ArchivesSpace search that just returns film items across all of our collections. So our photo archivist has tried out using the subject field to indicate format, so then you could filter results to certain types of media, but we haven't adopted that as a regular practice yet. So all that I have now is what I call our public inventory. This is a PDF on our website. It has collection level information and then item level descriptions for all the collections that have film in them. And this was just a quick solution that I came up with for now, for when a researcher says like, I want to see a list of all your film collections. And that is where I'm at. Starting with those guidelines from AAA, we developed what I think are really clear and consistent ways to describe media on the public side. And they're also really integrated with our description of whole collections and other types of media. That said, a very small percentage of our media is actually described yet. So I have plenty of room to adapt if there's things I could be doing differently. So thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
All right, thank you very much, Jamie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Wyatt Davis, and I am the Preservation Librarian at Florida State University Special Collections and Archives. So today I will be talking about FSU's migration from Archon to ArchivesSpace, our partially completed AV assessment, and our future of assessing collections using the ArchivesSpace assessments module. In fall 2018, the Florida Academic Library Services Cooperative, or FALSI for short, notified member institutions with FALSI-hosted Archon instances that they would need to start preparing to migrate data from Archon to ArchivesSpace. FSU Special Collections and Archives, or SCA, as I'll refer to it throughout the rest of my presentation, we had been preparing for this migration for a while. Our digital archivist, Crystal Thomas, had completed several projects focusing on improving the information in Archon, including adding old paper finding aids to Archon, as well as updating and uploading old EAD files. However, despite the work that had been done to prepare Archon to move to the next gen finding aid database, FALSI's timeline for the migration took us by surprise. We needed to be out of Archon in 6 months. During the migration preparation, we found certain information would not map easily, especially locations and top containers, and would have to hold off on fixing it until we had officially moved out into the new system. December 2018 marked the final migration of data from Archon to ArchivesSpace. Archon still remained our public finding aid database until it was shut off in late spring 2019, which gave us some time to fix the data that had been migrated to ArchivesSpace. Starting in March 2019, our digital archivists led a data remediation team that consisted of 30 staff members from across the libraries and campus repositories to fix basic metadata fields, formatting, and display issues. 1,399 records were remediated in less than a month. In May 2019, I took over as technical lead of ArchivesSpace and really started to explore the system. With most of our finding aids in a serviceable state, I was able to turn my attention to learning how to use the collections management tools like the Top Containers module and Space Calculator. After my initial research, I developed several projects to improve the location and top container information of our collections, as well as started writing an ArchivesSpace manual for our campus repositories. At the same time the migration was ramping up, I led a small team to start working on a survey of audiovisual materials in SCA's holdings. So starting in October 2018, we started compiling a list of all collections with AV materials. This kind of survey had never been done before, and we had never had a complete inventory of our AV holdings. The inventory was compiled by a graduate assistant and took a month to complete. The inventory gathered really basic top-level information. So things like the name of the collection, where the materials were located, formats described, as well as an estimate of how many AV items were in the collection. We kept the inventory simple at first because we plan to do a physical review of the materials at a later date. In spring 2019, our research services coordinator and preservation assistant started reviewing the AV holdings for preservation issues and documented the findings in the University of Illinois' Preservation Self-Assessment Program. PSAP is a terrific tool for collections management, especially audiovisual materials. The PSAP website has the best description of the tool. Through guided evaluations of materials, storage/exhibit environments, and institutional policies, the PSAP produces reports on the factors that impact the health of cultural heritage materials and defines the points from which to begin care. The image you see on your screen is a screenshot of an item level assessment report from PSAP of one of our collections that we did an assessment on, the FSU Tarpon Club collection. However, in fall 2019, the project was put on hold. After my deep dive into ArchivesSpace's collections management tools, I decided that I wanted to centralize any preservation survey results, processing priorities lists, and other collections information in ArchivesSpace. Fortunately, when the project stalled, we had only reviewed 24 of the 122 collections. Over the past year, SCA has started to develop its new processing program, and a major facet of that is an exploration of how to use ArchivesSpace to track collections documentation in one place. I'm sure many of you can relate to finding old priorities lists and assessments created by your predecessors stored in numerous folders across countless shared drives. It's certainly something we had to contend with. As I became more familiar with all of the collections management tools available in ASpace, I really bought into making it our one-stop shop for documenting our processing priorities, preservation surveys, linking the inventories and container lists, and everything in between. The assessments modules seem to be the answer to many of our questions of how to bring together documentation from various information silos in our division. The ArchivesSpace assessments module allows users to record the quantitative and qualitative condition of surveyed material, as well as rank the material's needs relative to the needs of other surveyed materials. Assessment records can be linked to accession, resource component, and digital object records, and multiple assessments can be created for a single resource record. So the main sections of an assessment record are basic information, assessment information, lists of material types and formats, and conservation issues. The only required elements to save an assessment record are a link to an existing record and who completed the survey. Otherwise, it's up to the users to determine what information is added and rated in the assessment. The basic information section is where users can document info like existing descriptions of the collection. So for example, deed of gifts and container lists, as well as define the purpose and scope of the assessment. The assessment information section is where you can assign ratings to various criteria, including housing quality, physical condition, reformatting readiness, and documentation quality. In the materials types and formats section, users can document all the material types and formats in the collection. A little self-explanatory there. And similar to the last section, the conservation issues section is a way to document the conservation and preservation issues found in the collection. One of my personal favorite features of the assessments module is the ability to add repository-specific assessment attributes. In addition to the default fields, administrators can add up to 10 additional ratings to assessment information and up to an additional 20 formats and of conservation formats and conservation issues may also be defined. This allows for users to have flexibility in their assessments and hone the assessment attributes based on their collection. While experimenting with the module, I populated the assessment attributes with the commonly found AV formats in our holdings, as well as their corresponding conservation issues. This feature will allow for us to continue our AV preservation survey in a similar way to what we were previously doing in PSAP. Another feature I am very excited about is the reports function. There are 2 assessment reports that users can generate: an assessment record list and assessment rating report. The assessment record list is exactly what it sounds like. It is a list of every assessment record created in a repository. The reports can be downloaded in various display formats and contain every single field from the assessment. The assessment rating report is different in that you can filter your results by the assessment rating. I find that this will be very helpful when planning for upcoming processing and rehousing projects. Last but not least, ArchivesSpace allows for users to import assessment records via CSV. We've talked a lot about spreadsheet uploads today. I love uploading spreadsheets. So this import function allows users to create assessment records independently from ArchivesSpace, which can be helpful if you're conducting an assessment in a location without internet. So like if you're on my campus and in the sub-basement where our collections are held, you may want to use that. And also, more excitingly, this is a great thing if you want to batch load assessments. I'm extremely interested in experimenting with batch uploading the data we have already gathered in PSAP. SCA is invested in using ArchivesSpace for its collections management, and I believe the assessments module will be the linchpin for our success. In the near future, I would like to continue our AV preservation survey by importing our previously gathered data, as well as creating new assessments for audiovisual materials. This summer, SCA will begin to rate its backlog for processing priorities, and we'll use the assessment module to track that information. Moving forward, every new collection will have an assessment attached to better track preservation issues and formats present among our collections. We are still very early in developing documentation and procedures around using the assessments module, but I am optimistic about using this tool for our collections management needs. And with that, thank you very much. I'll pass it back over to Jessica.
All right. Thank you all so much. That was really great. And it was really, it's always just so interesting to hear what everyone is doing in ArchivesSpace. And there was a ton of conversation in the chat. So thank you all for being very active listeners too. I'm going to go ahead and address the questions that were put into the Q&A panel. So if you have a question that you may have inadvertently dropped into the chat, please do put it in the Q&A so that we can just keep a little better track of them, because there's a lot happening in the chat right now, which I love. Some of the questions have already been answered as text, so I'm going to make sure that the questions that have not been addressed at all, I'm going to read those aloud first for the panelists, and then I will move over to the questions that have already had text answers, and I will read those and then answer them, or read the responses, and then if there's any follow-up anyone wants to make, please feel free. And since everyone is really offering up a lot of great advice in the chat, if I read a question that you want to weigh in on, please do. This is a really interesting conversation. So the first unanswered question in the Q&A is from Ben. We have a lot of media where someone consolidated recordings to save costs, understandable. We have sometimes tapes with multiple oral histories that are back to back to back. So one single physical tape has 7 disparate interviews. How would you recommend best separating these out when there isn't a one-to-one relationship between an item and its content?
That is a very good question. I feel like I have more questions from that question. And these are those the originals is really my question. I guess is maybe it could, if there are different, extents of it, whatever the original is. I just feel like I have more questions from that question and don't have a great answer.
I mean, I would say if you can create a separate object record for each interview, just attach the same tape as an instance. So these 4 interviews all have tape 4 listed as an instance because they're all included on tape 4. I think that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I would second that, Jamie. I think having a descriptive component for every intellectual item is what is going to read the most clearly, I think, to users. And so just figure out how to make sure they're attached to the correct objects for staff and make sure everyone understands that, this is the way you handle this situation. If you want to look at the Archives of American Art guidelines, I wrote out some pretty laborious decisions we made about how to handle that with scope notes, sort of like explaining, fragments are in this tape and that, that tape and so on. But, you'll want to work out what works best for your system.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so your instances and top containers can be shared across archival objects. So I think that that's really good. It sounds like in the chat is how a lot of people address it as well. Create those descriptive records and then link that shared instance. But Ben, if you're from an ArchivesSpace member institution and have access to the listservs, this would be a great question for the listserv. I'm sure that there are, for as many organizations as there are ways that people are probably addressing that issue. All right, next we have a question for Megan. I noticed that in your rules for extents as part of the guidelines at Smithsonian, your rules for extents in the guidelines at the Smithsonian are more specific to individual formats, 3 VHS, 5 U-matic, whereas the extent statement in the example at MARMIA is more broad. Video cassettes, formats include VHS, U-matic, etc. Has your opinion changed on how extents and controlled vocab should be followed when describing AV?
Well, that's a great question. It's really kind of a process, I think, of coming to an agreement about, what works best in your context. So yeah, I think for MARMIA, we're still in the process of figuring that out. And because we were doing this data migration work without actually being able to look at the content, we were limited in what we could do as far as describing definitively what formats were. And so for some formats, Siobhan could say, well, I'm pretty sure that like 98% of this series is U-matic. And then for other series, it wasn't as clear, but, and we're still at the very beginning stages of that whole project. So those examples are sort of like not sort of finished decisions, I guess I would say too. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to vary depending on where you go. At the Smithsonian, we had, there's like, how many were 14 archives at the Smithsonian, and they're all in different administrative units, different museums and so on. And there was like this summit of, AV archivists when we adopted actually Archivist Toolkit to decide what our formats, our extent type list, pick list would be. And that was what was the result of that is what's in the guidelines for the Archives of American Art. So it was, a lot of just coming together around preferences and so forth, and a little idiosyncratic, but at least consistent.
Can I also add one thing that I'm pretty sure I got from that guideline was that there is kind of hierarchy of ways that you can describe it, just depending on how specific information you have. So if I don't know anything, you can start with just saying there's moving images, and then you could say there's 16 video recordings. And then if you find out what the format is, you can say there are 3 VHS tapes. And I'm pretty sure that was from that as well, but it's just the flexibility of being as specific as you can, but having options, having a vocabulary ready for when you don't know specifically what it is.
Thanks, y'all. All right, we only have 1 minute left. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A. We only have one that has been unaddressed, either as a text response or during the Q&A. So we're going to read that one, and then we're going to conclude the Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to export out all of these questions with all of their answers that were in the Q&A, and I'll make them available with the recording. So when the recording comes available, I know there were a lot of questions in the chat about resources. So all of these great links that everyone referenced, I'll make sure that anyone that is comfortable with including their guides or their resources that they shared, we'll make sure those are linked. The Q&A is linked, and copies of the slides are linked. But we're going to finish it up with one final question from Lisa. So for those of you that are using digital objects for your AV material, are you creating an item record for each digital object, or are you creating a single item record with multiple extents for a digital object?
I guess so far our case has been, because we're basically working with description that has components that are correspond to individual tapes, that you know, there's one digital object made from that tape, and there's one item. So we haven't had to sort of make that decision. But if I had to make that decision, I think I would prefer to, yes, have a single item per intellectual object with multiple instances.
Thanks. All right, we're getting some, I agree with Megan's in the chat and some links in the chat. But since we are a little bit past time, we're going to go ahead and conclude. Like I said, I'll make sure all of those resources are included with the recording when that comes available. And I would just like to thank all of our presenters today for a really great webinar, very informative. I definitely enjoyed it, and I learned a lot as a person that doesn't manage AV material, especially the amount of extents that you have to deal with. So thank you all. This was really great. Thank you to all of the attendees for coming and for participating so actively. This was a lot of fun, and I will see you all at the next ArchivesSpace webinar.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.